Hello there. Welcome to Sungrand. I'm Jerrel. I'm a normal human being. I make video games for a living. This is a new series I would like to start where I analyze a character design and I point out the design elements that I think are interesting that make this character stand out and unique, and help discuss some of the ideas around character design if you yourself are getting into video game development, art, or character design, or you're just interested in these characters, or you're interested in some of the behind the scenes that go on when it comes to creating a video game. So to start this series, I want to start with one of my favorite video game characters, Cloud Strife from Final Fantasy VII. You, even if you haven't played the game, you probably recognize the character because he's so prominent. He's got a cool sword, which is massive. And we'll be taking a look at 3 different renditions of the artwork. So what I want to point out is that for the time, for the mid-90s, this design is actually quite refreshing and different. These days, the color scheme and the sort of the textures that are used on the character, they don't really stand out. But back then, this really stood out because in the 90s, we were mostly seeing characters that were highly saturated in terms of color. They were kind of cartoony, exaggerated proportions. The sort of more realistic proportions that we see on these characters were not common in the 90s. And you had the bright blues and the bright reds of Mario, or the bright blue of Sonic the Hedgehog. So to see a character that had this more reserved color scheme was really interesting. And that was true for the entire cast of Final Fantasy VII. And it's probably why the artwork stood out so much in the era. What I think makes the character so interesting already is the asymmetry. So if you are in character design and you just need a shortcut to make your character look interesting and look like the protagonist, is use asymmetry. And that means that your visual elements from the left side are not the same as the visual elements on the right side. Here we have this really interesting pauldron that doesn't look like any sort of knight pauldron. We've seen medieval armor and we know what that looks like, but what is this thing? You know, there's like bolts coming out of it. He has this sort of gauntlet that looks like it was taken off of a machine. So logically, the viewer sees that and doesn't necessarily immediately comprehend what it is they're looking at, though there are visual elements that are somewhat familiar. And that is a way to visually hook your viewer, visually hook the audience. So there are some vaguely familiar design elements, but they are implemented in a way that is unfamiliar to the audience. And that makes for very interesting character design. As a kid, I always wondered, do you screw things onto that? What do you do with that? Where did he get that from? Who sells that? Who makes that? So the fact that it sort of subconsciously asks these questions, even if you are not actively asking that, your mind is sort of wondering, what is that, man? Your mind wants to make sense of this stuff. So it's so interesting. So just from a point of looking at the textures, this is a very standard usage of layering textures on your character from top to bottom. But there's nothing wrong with that. And it is it's a staple when it comes to designing a character. So here at the top of the character, you started with the hair, which is bright yellow. It's in other versions of the character, we see it's much brighter, more yellow, especially in the game. As we move downward from the character, we have vertical leather and then horizontal leather, and the leather stands out from this sort of wool or cloth that the turtleneck goes up. And I gotta say, that's probably the first turtleneck I've seen in a video game character design. Thinking back to the 90s, you have this sort of cut-off, sleeveless look, and this was such a different look for the 90s. You immediately move on to the metal here, but it's not a shiny metal. It's this sort of dirty, grungy metal that looks like it was taken off of a machine, that already gives the character a scrappy sort of ragtag look to him, where he sort of has to improvise his equipment. Of course, you have his bare skin showing, which breaks up the colors. You have the cloth of the bandage, and then you have the metal here, and then back to the leather of the glove. Here, moving down, we have a color element. That color element, in this situation, it matches the color element of, or the color dynamic of the top and then you have the glove with an accent of metal in there. Now, what's interesting about the leather is there are accents of metal in there, so it makes it visually cohesive. It ties back to the metal that you see here and here, and that makes it interesting to look at as we move down from the character. Nothing all that, crazy. As we see the Final Fantasy games and RPGs in general move forward from this point in terms of when they were created, you tend to see more detailed and complex designs, and especially textural elements when it comes to the lower body. You'll have half pant legs, full pant legs, shoulder pads, dangly bits, keychains, zippers. But I really like this understated, simple design. This is really just, it's clean, it's simple. And as we move down from the character, you have the leather of the boots, but you also have hints of metal along the boot with the zipper. So this is such a simple design that works so well. It works so excellently effective at communicating the character, the texture of the world, the setting. Cloud absolutely looks like he fits into the world of Midgar. And just the use of the horizontal leather, vertical leather, then you have some vertical metal here to accent the horizontal metal that we see there. And then they didn't go overboard with the metal because, I'm not going to say because, but it works out that it helps accentuate the sword. Let's go ahead and have a look at the most modern version of Cloud. This design, despite the fact that it's a totally different art aesthetic, you can tell exactly immediately who the character is. It's very true to the character, but the color schemes I feel are weaker in the situation. The design of the color is not as good. The color choices, you have this sort of, it's basically just black instead of the purple, which was in the original game. And I would say that this is a worse design, and that it is not a good design in terms of color, except for the fact that this character in context, the design works extremely well. And that is because in Final Fantasy Remake, the two that are out now, it's not just about the color, it's also about the texture of the material and how it catches and expresses the light of the environment. Lighting is so strong, it's such an integral part of the visual the visual language of the Final Fantasy VII remakes. And so despite the fact that if you look at it, he's all basically just one color, and then his skin tone and his hair is almost the exact same color as his skin tone. So if we just go like this, if we just blur it, right? It's a bad design. It's dull, right? Out of context, but in context, it works extremely well. And that is because the leather catches the light in a very different way than the whatever fabric they're expressing here, whether they're trying to make it look like denim, and then this is like a sort of wool. But the leather, the metal, and the denim, or what have you, catches the light in such a different way that in different settings, they express the light and the color so differently that the character is still interesting and it still works. So out of context, this is not a good version of Cloud's design. It's very plain, but in context, it works very well. And that's likely because the designers, the developers of the game, especially the art director, knew that there's going to be such intense lighting in the Final Fantasy VII remakes. There's so many different sources of light, so many different colors and intensities, all different light sources coming in from different directions. If they had gone with a character design where the colors are more similar to the original, or they're more saturated, it likely would have resulted in a messier looking character in the context of playing the game. So this is still, a great version of Cloud because it works in the context. And lastly, I will look at the Smash Bros. Version of Cloud, which for me is my favorite version of a modern rendition of Cloud. To me, the visual designers here understand what makes the character work, what gives the character his unique identifying traits. I don't really need to point out, the colors and the textures because they're so faithful to the original that there isn't a reason to do that. But what makes this version so interesting is the colors are more faithful to the colors of the in-game model that Cloud was expressed with in the original Final Fantasy VII. While this yellow isn't that sort of neon bright yellow from the original, it stands out from his flesh tones quite well. We have more detail on his pauldron here, and it's in an interesting way. It's not like, oh, it's not perfectly, faithful to the original, it's bad. This is such an interesting design. It's really cool, but it's not bastardous in any way, and it looks faithful to the original. The leather on his shoulder straps here are slightly lighter, so they add a little bit more dynamic. And the leather on the shoes is a little bit darker. For me personally, if I was designing this character, I would have made his boots probably the same color as his glove. The glove is a little bit darker than the leather here, and that's totally fine. But for me personally, as a designer, it's a little bit messy to me that the boots are darker still. And if we sort of blur that a bit, you can see that the boots really blend in with the pants, and the boots are almost, they're basically the same tone and dynamic as the pants. So like you could even, if you remove those cuffs, it would kind of feel like they're footy pajamas. I mean, you okay, give me a second here. So if we take our clone stamp tool, I'm sort of making this cursed a little bit. You can see that the pants blend into the shoes in terms of the dynamic and the tone, and not in a good way. I feel that if the boots were the same color as the gloves, it would just visually be stronger. Let's just go ahead, and if we can just do that really, do that really quickly here. Just the hue on that, and bring up the brightness on that. Okay, let me just take a step back. So I've gone and adjusted that very quickly. Obviously a real, someone actually doing the job would spend more time doing that. But to me as a designer, when I step back, that visually is stronger as a character design. It's more coherent in terms of the layering of the textures and the colors. That's generally how I would design my characters. But let's just, it's not my character design, so I'll go ahead and just bring it on back. So, so that's what it was. So here's my adjustment. Here's the original. Obviously it's not going to make a difference in Smash because the characters are moving so fast and there's so many different lighting situations. So it doesn't matter. This isn't, obviously it's not a bad design. Just for me personally, if I was doing the design, I would have made the leather match the shoes. So that's what I wanted to share. Also, what I noticed with this version of Cloud, they understand that Cloud is very strong. Not only, does he have story reasons, for what happened to him as his backstory, but he's swinging this thing all day long, man. Every day is arm day for Cloud. And modern versions, like this version, they also make him look quite strong, but we've seen other modern versions where he has these little toothpick arms, and they make him look more effeminate. And I'm not against men who are effeminate. That's not a problem to me. But this is Cloud Strife, who's swinging this every day is arm day. Cloud should not have toothpick arms, and they've got it right here. That looks right. This looks right. This is a little toothpicky. And that's probably why some modern versions give him these really thin toothpick arms, is because in this artwork, he's really slender. He's a slender boy. But in modern versions, they do address that, and they do fix that logic discrepancy. So anyway, I hope this was interesting to you. Let me know if you enjoyed that, and if you're a fan of Final Fantasy VII, and who's your favorite Final Fantasy VII character. If you would like to like the video and subscribe, I'll wait here. So I'll just wait until you click subscribe. I'll wait.